But when class was done, when we finally graduated, I finally had the time to go to a gynecologist because it's not an emergency doctor, so they're not open 24 hours. They're open from 8 to 5. We were in class from 9:30 to 4:30. I couldn't go. They're not open on weekends. So I had to wait until school was done. Finally, school was done. It wasn't that. It wasn't the class. I mean, I'm sure it didn't help. When we finally graduated, I finally had the time to go to a gynecologist because it's not an emergency doctor, so they're not open 24 hours. They're open from 8 to 5. We were in class from 9:30 to 4:30. I couldn't go. They're not open on weekends. So I had to wait until school was done. Finally, school was done. I go to a gynecologist. They do a pelvic exam, and the gynecologist says, "Oh, I think you have fibroids." And I was like, well, that explains a lot of things, because I started looking up symptoms, and I was like, oh, that's everything that I have. But everything that has to do with your reproductive system is like anything else, where symptoms are like, oh, you might have poisoning of this if you have flu-like symptoms. But everything has flu-like symptoms. The same thing with like reproductive issues. Oh, you have pain during periods, heavy bleeding. They all kind of have the same symptoms. It's kind of annoying because it's really vague. She said, yeah, it's rather large, so we're gonna do an ultrasound. We're gonna schedule you for an ultrasound, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, great. Oh, she also ordered for me to get a complete blood test. I have a training day at Volcano Bay, and my period had started that day. At 7 o'clock at night to about 3 o'clock in the morning, I lost about 9 ounces of blood. That Sunday was September 8th, and I'll never forget this. September 8th, I had the in-service at Volcano Bay, and I have never felt so winded, so tired, and my legs, like my thighs, started cramping so bad that I got cold. And just swimming from here to there made me tired. And I'm a really good swimmer. That usually doesn't wind me like that, but I couldn't, it was really, really bad. And I got super nervous because the next day, Monday, September 9th, I had a practical for a fire department. And practicals are hard because you're in full gear, so you're throwing ladders, you are carrying heavy things, you're dragging charged hose lines, which means that the hose has water in it, so it's heavy. I just swam and I felt like dying, and tomorrow I have to go put gear on and do heavy things. What is going to happen to me tomorrow? People of YouTube who are watching me, I will tell you what happened on Monday, September 9th. I was so hopeful that I was going to get hired at this apartment because I knew that I could do this test. I've done it before and I've passed it. And a few days prior, I had been training with a classmate of mine, that same test, and I did fine. I apologize if I get emotional. 30 seconds into my test, I felt like my lungs were being squeezed and I couldn't breathe. It wasn't an issue of physically moving air. I could move air. Mechanically, it was happening. For anyone who is a medic or an EMT or a healthcare professional of any kind, you'll understand this. Ventilation was happening, respiration was not. For those of you who are not in the medical field, ventilation is physical moving of air. That was happening just fine. The respiration happens in here, it happens in your lungs. The transfer of oxygen and CO2 in your alveoli was not working very well. I immediately broke out into a sweat, and the blood was rushing in my ears, and I somehow got through this test. The test is 3 parts. Each one is timed separately. The first part you have 4.5 minutes. The second part you have 2 minutes. And the third part you have 4.5 minutes. So all in all, the test should be 4.5 and 4.5 is what? 9 minutes, 9, 10, 11. It should be like at most 11 minutes to finish this. I am pretty sure I was out there for anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes trying to finish this test because I could not breathe, because everything that I was picking up was extra heavy. Even if I did it the week before and I picked it up with ease, I could not pick it up. I did it, but I had to stop every 30 seconds, and it was literally like I was gasping for air, like from within, not, but like in here, I could not get air. And by the time I climbed the ladder to the second floor, and that was just like, that is the last stretch of the test, I got inside the window and I sat down on the floor, and I had already run out of air. Like, we have our air packs on. I had run out of air. I should not have consumed a whole bottle of air doing that test. You should not run out of air. And I had run out of air at the base of that ladder. That's how much air I was sucking in because I couldn't breathe. And I sat there. I felt like my rib cage was gonna crack. I was breathing so hard because I just couldn't. And the proctor came up and I ripped my mask off because I was like, I can't breathe. I'm starting to see blue. Like, I felt like I was dying. And he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm not okay. And, I was like, listen, I'm sorry. I didn't want to say anything, but I'm having medical issues and I don't know what they are. There's a small chance that I might be slightly anemic, but we don't know anything yet. All I know is that I might have fibroids, and that's all I know. I'm getting my blood test tomorrow. And he's like, I'm sorry you're going through that. I don't want you to get hurt, so let me just help you take your coat off because you are overheated, your skin is red, and you need to calm down. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I took my stuff off. I sat there for a little bit until I could get my feet out from under me, and there we go. I moved on. I knew that I wasn't getting an interview. I wasn't moving on in the process. Even though this guy saw me push so hard, and he kept asking, do you want to quit? Are you okay? And I was like, no, I'm not okay. I feel like crap, but I'm not going to quit. But I went way over time. So I left and I cried the whole way home because I was finally a firefighter medic and this was my chance to get hired somewhere, and I blew it. And for all I knew at the time, I had no more information than what you know right now. Based off of everything that just happened, I was like, man, maybe I'm really not fit for this. Maybe I really am not capable of being a firefighter. And I came home and I had the biggest headache, and my husband and I went to go eat because whatever breakfast I had that morning was completely burned off. When I got out of the car, I took 2 steps and I felt like I was going to pass out again. I didn't say anything to him because I didn't want to scare him, but I grabbed his hand, and to him it seemed normal because we usually hold hands, but I was just like, because my cheeks kind of got hot, and it took from us going from the car all the way inside for it to finally chill out. And I was like, oh my God. For the next couple of days, I was so exhausted. I was like, oh my God, my head still hurts. I feel like I didn't feel good for the next 2 days. Anyway, the next day, I went and got a blood test. The following day is when I got the news. My hemoglobin level was at a 5. For those of you who do not know, and I didn't know until this moment, I was like, oh, well, what's normal? For females, a normal hemoglobin level is between 11 and 15. No wonder I couldn't breathe. No wonder that during my test I felt like I was going to die because I did not have enough oxygen in my body. The cells, the red blood cells that I did have in my body had 100% oxygen, but I did not have enough red blood cells, meaning I did not have enough oxygen. No wonder there was no chemical exchange happening. No wonder I felt like I was going to die. And then I started crying because all of a sudden everything made sense. I have been anemic for God knows how long. I ended up having to get a blood transfusion, and I felt better, and I was like, cool, I wish this would have happened before Monday, September 9th, and maybe I could have got hired at this place, but such is life. Fine. So I go and have my ultrasound, and it turns out that I have a large cyst somewhere, and they can't tell if it's coming from my uterus or from my ovary, but it's large enough that they're concerned, and they tell me I need to have a surgery. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I need to have surgery. And they referred me to a gynecologist because they didn't want to scare me, but because of the size of it, they wanted to make sure it wasn't cancer. They didn't think it was because of my age and symptoms, but might as well get it checked out by a gynecologist, which is the gynecologist, just to make sure. The next day I get a call from her office, and I set up an appointment, and I go over there, September 23rd. And just like that, we were talking about stuff, and she's like, yeah, October 11th, that's when we'll do your surgery, and it'll be fine. And I was like, oh, wow, she's quick, and I'm glad. It worked out time-wise, but again, that's all I knew. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know anything other than there was a large cyst that looked like it could be coming from my ovary that needed to be got rid of, and that's it. And they're like, well, we'll test it for cancer, you have to have an MRI before the surgery, and we'll talk about it. I started doing research on my own. The sciatica was coming from this large mass pressing onto my nerves. The super heavy bleeding was coming from that. Like, all of these symptoms were coming from that. Like, it was messing up my life, basically. October 8th, go figure, I had a test for another department. Except, of course, my life works out this way that October 4th, I got my period again. And it was worse than September's period. It happened to the point where I had to call out of work. I was on my way to the parking garage of Volcano Bay, and I had to call and be like, never mind, I can't come in. And I had to turn around and drive 40 minutes back home. And again, this is going to be TMI, but we're past that on this video. I got home and got out of the car, and the blood started running down my legs. That's how bad it was. I guess I'm going to be home for the next 3 days, bleeding out and becoming anemic again. And yes, I was taking iron pills by this point, but there was so much blood that I was going to be anemic again by the time I got to my test. And I was like, another department that I won't get hired for. But I have to show up for this test because I passed the written, and I can't just not show up because I never know what's going to happen. Maybe I'll be Wonder Woman today and I'll pass. I don't know, but if I don't go, then I'm never going to find out. Anyway, October 8th comes around, I get over there, and I'm scared because I already knew what it felt like the first time, and I didn't say anything because I don't want them to be like, well, don't test. So this test was different where we had, I think it was 5 different scenarios, and each one is timed separately, and I like this kind of test because you can make mistakes in each section and still pass because they're watching you, and they're not just giving you points based on time, they're also giving you points based on your technique, how you correct a mistake, how you get things done. It's a lot more like realistic, I guess. First scenario, I'm doing okay. I get called for time, and I was like, I was almost done with it, and I got called for time, and I was like, okay, but I'm not having as much trouble breathing, so maybe we can get through this. Second scenario, that's where I get messed up again. That's when I lost all of my breathing ability. And after I get called time there, I had to tell the lieutenant that was with me, luckily it was a woman, I had to be like, listen, I'm not trying to get pity out of this, but I have a surgery on this Friday, 3 days from now. So, and I've been anemic and I'm probably anemic right now. I'm just letting you know. And she's like, okay, I'm not trying to be rude, but because it's a continual test and more people are testing, we either have to go or stop. Do you want to go or do you want to stop or do you want to continue? And I was like, we'll keep going. And she's like, okay. I know she wasn't being rude. She was just, we needed to be out of the way for the next testers. This is where I got really depressing because it was the ladder scenario, and I'm really good with ladders, and it takes me like a minute and a half at the most to get it off the ground and up perfectly fine. It took me the whole 3 minutes to even get it barely to the wall because I was so weak that I could not lift it, and it's a ladder that I've lifted plenty of times. So that was depressing, and I was like, wow, got called for time again. And we moved on to the next thing, which for me is one of the hardest things, and that's the 100-foot charged hose line drag. Somehow, don't ask me how, I actually made it the 100 feet, and I almost finished that scenario. But for whatever reason, the way the nozzle was, I couldn't change it to where it needed to be, and I got called on time. But I dragged it all the way the 100 feet, and normally, like, I've had trouble with that repeatedly, even when I wasn't anemic, but I didn't know that. But somehow I made it the 100 feet, but that killed me, and they had to literally help me off the floor and move me to the side, and they had to take, like, I took my helmet and gloves off, but I couldn't take my air pack off, I couldn't take my jacket off, because my hands just weren't working. Like, they were tingling and they were numb, and I couldn't feel anything. And they literally, both of them, I had a lieutenant and one of the medics with me, like, proctoring, and they literally had to get under each of my shoulders and help me walk. And they had to put me in the back of the rescue. They put me on oxygen. They did all that because they saw how well I was not feeling. And that's when I had to tell them everything. I had to tell them everything that had just happened to me, like, within the last, like, month, and how I was having a surgery on Friday, and how there was a huge mass in my ovary that we don't know what it was, that it could be cancerous, that I had a blood transfusion, that, you know, like, that I messed up on I had to tell them everything because they asked for a history, because I was their patient now. I was not a candidate for being hired at the department at this very moment. I was now a patient. And they were so nice to me, and they were actually very supportive, and I appreciate that. And I really hope I get a chance in the future with them, because of how well they treated me and how they told me that they were really proud of me, because some people didn't even show up to test, and how some people had quit because it was too hard and they couldn't continue. They weren't sick, they just, oh, this is too, I'm tired, I can't, and they quit. And they were like, if you would have quit, we would not have judged you for it, but you pushed through until you literally couldn't anymore. And they were really proud of me, and I was sitting there crying. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm wasting your time. It was really emotional, but they were so supportive. And in fact, I ended up getting an email from them, and I got put on their like recruit list. So that's the best outcome that I have ever had from a test for a department that I didn't get hired for. So thank you guys for that. I'm not naming any departments because I don't want to do that, but they were really cool.